What happens when a beloved actor sits down for what should be a friendly chat, only to face a barrage of personal attacks and condescending remarks that cross every line of decency? In just 45 seconds, a simple question about his career would spiral into one of the most shocking confrontations in daytime television history, exposing the true nature of a host who thought she could say anything without consequence. Neil Dudgeon arrived at the Loose Women Studios that morning with nothing but good intentions. The star of Midsummer Murders had been invited to discuss his long-running role as DCI John Barnaby, a character beloved by millions of viewers across the country. He walked onto the set with his usual warm smile, greeting the panel with genuine friendliness. The audience applauded as he took his seat, completely unaware of the ambush that was about to unfold. Denise Welch sat at the head of the table, flanked by fellow panelists, Ruth Langsford, Janet Street Porter, and Colleen Nolan. The atmosphere seemed light at first, with Ruth kicking off the conversation by welcoming Neil and thanking him for joining them. Neil responded graciously, talking about how much he enjoyed playing the detective and how grateful he was for the show's loyal fan base. But then Denise leaned forward, and the tone shifted immediately. "So, Neil," Denise began, her voice dripping with a strange mixture of sweetness and something far more sinister. "Midsummer Murders. I mean, it's been going for what, 100 years now? Do you ever feel like you're just, I don't know, going through the motions at this point?" The question landed like a slap. Neil's smile faltered slightly, but he maintained his composure. "Well, not at all, actually," he replied politely. "Each episode brings new challenges, new scripts, new directors. It's always fresh for me." Denise laughed, but it wasn't a warm laugh. It was dismissive, almost mocking. "Fresh? Really? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like the same thing over and over. Small village, someone dies, you solve it. Rinse and repeat." Ruth shifted uncomfortably in her seat, glancing at Denise with a look that suggested she wasn't entirely on board with this line of questioning. Janet Street Porter raised her eyebrows but said nothing, watching the exchange with keen interest. Neil kept his cool, responding with quiet dignity. "I think our viewers would disagree with you there. The show has remained popular because we put real effort into making each story unique and engaging." "Your viewers," Denise interrupted, waving her hand dismissively. "You mean pensioners who've got nothing better to do than watch the same predictable rubbish every week?" The studio went quiet. You could feel the tension ripple through the room like electricity. Colleen Nolan's eyes widened, and she looked down at her notes, clearly uncomfortable. Ruth opened her mouth as if to interject, but Denise wasn't finished. "I mean, let's be honest," Denise continued, leaning back in her chair with an air of superiority. "It's not exactly groundbreaking television, is it? It's comfort food for people who don't want to think too hard." Neil's jaw tightened. His hands, which had been resting casually on the armrests, now gripped them slightly. But still, he maintained his professionalism. "I think you're being quite disrespectful, not just to me, but to the millions of people who enjoy the show. There's nothing wrong with entertainment that brings people comfort and joy." "Oh, don't get all precious about it," Denise shot back, her voice rising slightly. "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. You've been doing the same job for over a decade. Don't you ever worry that you're wasting your talent? That you could be doing something more meaningful?" Ruth finally spoke up, her voice gentle but firm. "Denise, I think that's a bit harsh. Neil's built a wonderful career, and Midsummer Murders is an institution." "An institution for the half asleep," Denise muttered, just loud enough for everyone to hear. Janet Street Porter let out a small gasp, and Colleen shook her head slightly, looking genuinely appalled. The audience sat in stunned silence, unsure whether this was part of some planned drama or a real confrontation unfolding before their eyes. Neil straightened in his seat, his voice calm but edged with steel. "I came here today as a guest, expecting a respectful conversation. Instead, You've spent the last few minutes insulting my work, my audience, and frankly, me personally. I'm not sure what I've done to deserve this treatment." Denise rolled her eyes dramatically. "Oh, please, don't play the victim. You're a big boy. You can handle a bit of criticism." "Criticism is one thing," Neil replied, his voice growing firmer. "What you're doing is something else entirely. You're being deliberately rude and condescending." "I'm being honest," Denise snapped back. "Maybe you're just not used to." "Someone telling you the truth instead of blowing smoke up your backside?" Ruth interjected again, more forcefully this time. "Denise, this isn't fair. Neil's our guest. And as our guest, he should be able to handle a real conversation instead of the usual softball nonsense we serve up on these shows," Denise retorted, not even looking at Ruth. Neil took a deep breath, clearly trying to remain composed despite the rising heat in the room. "A real conversation involves mutual respect. What you're doing right now isn't conversation. It's an attack." "An attack?" Denise laughed again, that same cold, dismissive laugh. "You think this is an attack. I'm just asking questions that nobody else has the guts to ask." "No," Neil said quietly but firmly. "You're grandstanding. You're trying to create drama at my expense, and I'm not going to sit here and be your punching bag." The energy in the studio had shifted dramatically. The audience members were exchanging glances, some looking uncomfortable, others appearing almost excited by the escalating conflict. Janet Street Porter finally spoke up, her distinctive voice cutting through the tension. "I've got to say, Denise, you're being a bit much here. The man's just trying to talk about his show." Denise whipped her head toward Janet. "Oh, so now everyone's ganging up on me? Typical." "Nobody's ganging up on you," Colleen said softly, speaking for the first time since the confrontation began. "But you are being unnecessarily harsh." "I'm being real," Denise insisted, her voice taking on a defensive edge. "This is what this show is supposed to be about. Real women having real conversations." "Real conversations don't involve belittling your guests," Neil interjected, his patience clearly wearing thin. "I've been nothing but polite to you, and you've responded with contempt." Denise leaned forward again, her eyes narrowing. "You know what your problem is? You're too sensitive. You can't handle someone challenging you." "Challenging me would involve actual questions about my work," Neil replied, his voice rising slightly for the first time. "What you're doing is just being nasty for the sake of it." "Nasty." Denise's voice went up an octave. "You think I'm nasty? I'm just not going to sit here and pretend that your little detective show is some kind of masterpiece when it's clearly just mediocre television for mediocre people." The gasps from the audience were audible this time. Ruth put her hand over her mouth, looking genuinely shocked. Colleen looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. Even Janet, known for her own blunt approach, seemed taken aback by the viciousness of Denise's words. Neil stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. The movement was deliberate, controlled. "Mediocre people," he repeated quietly. "You just called millions of viewers mediocre people." "If the shoe fits," Denise said with a shrug, leaning back in her chair as if she just made the most casual observation in the world. "That's disgraceful," Neil said, his voice steady but filled with quiet anger. "Absolutely disgraceful. Those people you're insulting, they're hard-working individuals, families, people who deserve entertainment without being judged for their choices, and you sit there in your position of privilege and mock them." "Oh, here we go," Denise said, rolling her eyes again. "The high and mighty speech." "There's nothing high and mighty about basic decency," Neil shot back. "Something you clearly know nothing about." Ruth tried once more to salvage the situation. "Look, maybe we should take a quick break and—" "No," Neil interrupted, holding up his hand. "No break needed. I'm done here." Denise laughed, but this time there was a hint of nervousness in it. "What? You're going to storm off? How dramatic." "I'm not storming off," Neil said calmly, already beginning to remove his microphone. I'm making a choice not to sit here and be insulted by someone who clearly has no respect for me or the people who watch my show. There's a difference. You're being ridiculous, Denise said, her voice taking on a slightly desperate quality, as she realized she was losing control of the situation. Am I? Neil asked, pausing to look directly at her. Let me ask you something, Denise. Why did you invite me here? Was it to have a genuine conversation about my work, or was it to create exactly this kind of scene? Denise opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. For the first time since the interview began, she seemed at a loss. Neil continued, his voice measured and clear. Because if it was the latter, congratulations. You've succeeded, but you've also shown everyone watching exactly who you are. And who am I? Denise asked, her voice challenging, but with an undercurrent of uncertainty. Someone who thinks being rude is the same as being interesting, Neil replied. Someone who mistakes cruelty for honesty. Someone who's so desperate for attention that they'll tear down a guest just to create a moment. The silence that followed was deafening. Ruth, Janet, and Colleen all sat frozen, unsure how to respond. The audience was completely quiet, every eye fixed on the confrontation unfolding before them. Denise's face had gone red. How dare you? How dare I? Neil's voice rose again. How dare you? You invited me onto your show as a guest, and you've done nothing but attack me from the moment we started talking. You've insulted my work, my intelligence, and the intelligence of everyone who enjoys what I do. And now you're upset because I'm standing up for myself? You're being overly dramatic, Denise insisted, but her voice lacked its earlier confidence. No, I'm being honest, Neil said, echoing her earlier words back at her. Something you claimed to value just a few minutes ago. Colleen finally found her voice again. Neil's right, Denise. You've been out of line. Oh, not you. Too, Denise snapped at Colleen. I thought at least you would understand what we're trying to do here. What are we trying to do? Colleen asked quietly. Because it looks to me like you're just being mean to someone who came here in good faith. Denise looked around the table, seeming to realize for the first time that the other panelists were not on her side. This is unbelievable. I'm the only one willing to ask real questions. And now, I'm the villain. Real questions aren't the same as personal attacks, Janet pointed out. And you crossed that line about 5 minutes ago. Neil had finished removing his microphone and placed it carefully on the arm of his chair. I've worked in this industry for many years, he said, addressing not just Denise, but the entire panel and the audience beyond. I've done interviews all over the world. I've faced tough questions, challenging conversations, even heated debates. But I've never, and I mean never, been treated with such blatant disrespect as I have been here today. You're overreacting, Denise said, but her voice was quieter now, less certain. Am I? Neil asked again. Tell me, if someone came to your workplace and spent 10 minutes telling you that your job was worthless, that the people who support you were mediocre, and that you were wasting your life, would you just sit there and take it? Denise didn't answer. She looked down at her notes, her earlier bravado crumbling. That's what I thought, Neil said softly. The thing is, Denise, you can disagree with my work. You can not be a fan of Midsomer Murders. That's absolutely fine. But what you've done today goes beyond personal opinion. You've been cruel, and you've been disrespectful, and I refuse to participate in it any further. Ruth spoke up, her voice filled with genuine regret. Neil, I'm so sorry. This wasn't supposed to go like this. Neil turned to her with a kind smile, the first genuine smile he'd shown since the interview took its dark turn. I know, Ruth, and I appreciate that, but I think it's best if I leave now. Please don't, Colleen said, looking distressed. We can start over. Ask you about the things we should have been asking about from the beginning. Neil shook his head gently. I appreciate the sentiment, I really do. But the damage is done. And honestly, I don't think I can sit here anymore and pretend this is okay. He turned to look at Denise one final time. She was staring at the desk, refusing to meet his eyes. "I hope you think about what happened here today," he said quietly. "I hope you think about how you treated someone who came here as your guest. And I hope for the sake of your future guests that you learn from it." "Don't lecture me," Denise muttered, but there was no fire in her voice anymore. "I'm not lecturing," Neil replied. "I'm just pointing out what everyone else is already thinking." He turned to the audience, many of whom had been watching with their hands over their mouths, and gave them a small wave. "Thank you for your support over the years. I'm sorry you had to witness this." Several audience members started to applaud, a slow clap that grew louder as more people joined in. It wasn't the polite applause that typically greets a departing guest. It was something more. It was support, validation, a clear message about whose side they were on. Denise's head snapped up at the sound of the applause, her face registering shock and something that looked like hurt. "Are you serious right now?" she asked the audience, her voice incredulous. But the applause continued, growing even louder. Some audience members were even standing now, showing their solidarity with Neil. Neil raised his hand to quiet them. "Thank you," he said simply. "But there's no need for that. I'm just going to go now." As he turned to walk off the set, Denise suddenly stood up, her chair scraping loudly. "Fine," she shouted, her voice carrying across the studio. "Go ahead and leave. Run away because you can't handle a real conversation." Neil stopped and turned back, his expression one of calm resolve. "I'm not running away, Denise. I'm walking away. There's a significant difference. Running away is what you do when you're afraid. Walking away is what you do when you have dignity and self-respect." "Dignity?" Denise's voice was shrill now. "You're walking off a live television show?" "Because you gave me no choice," Neil replied evenly. "You created an environment where staying would mean accepting your mistreatment. I'm choosing not to accept it." Janet stood up as well, but unlike Denise, her posture was one of support. "He's absolutely right to go," she said, looking directly at Denise. "You've made this uncomfortable for everyone." "Oh, so now you're all against me?" Denise looked around wildly at her fellow panelists. "Nobody's against you," Ruth said, standing as well. "But we're not going to pretend what just happened was okay." Colleen remained seated, but nodded in agreement. "You went too far, Denise. Way too far." Denise's eyes were wide now, darting between her colleagues, Neil, and the still applauding audience. "This is absurd. I was just doing my job." "Your job is to interview guests, not to berate them," Janet said sharply. "There's a line, and you didn't just cross it, you obliterated it." Neil watched this exchange with a mixture of sadness and vindication. He hadn't wanted this confrontation, hadn't asked for any of it, but now that it was happening, the truth was finally coming out. "I'm going to file a complaint about this," Denise said suddenly, though it was unclear who she was planning to complain to, or about what. "A complaint?" Neil's voice held a note of disbelief. "About what exactly? About the fact that your colleagues are pointing out your behavior? About the fact that I'm choosing to leave rather than be insulted further?" "About this whole setup," Denise said, her voice growing, desperate. "This was clearly planned to make me look bad." The absurdity of the statement hung in the air. Ruth actually laughed, a short, incredulous sound. "Denise, nobody needed to plan anything. You did this entirely on your own." "I was being authentic," Denise protested. "I was being real." "Being real doesn't mean being cruel," Colleen said quietly. "You can be honest without being hurtful. That's a lesson most of us learn as children." Denise's face flushed an even deeper red. "I don't have to stand here and listen to this." "No, you don't," Neil agreed. "Just like I don't have to stand here and listen to your insults. The difference is, I'm leaving with my dignity intact." "Your dignity?" Denise laughed, but it sounded forced and hollow. "You're walking off a show like a petulant child." A petulant child throws a tantrum when they don't get their way, Neil responded calmly. I'm making a rational decision based on your unacceptable behavior. Once again, there's a difference. The audience applause had finally died down, but the atmosphere in the studio remained charged with tension. Camera operators stood uncertainly, unsure whether to keep filming or cut away. Producers in the gallery were undoubtedly scrambling to figure out how to handle this unprecedented situation. Ruth moved toward Neil, placing a gentle hand on his arm. I really am sorry, she said again, her voice sincere. You deserved so much better than this. Thank you, Ruth, Neil said warmly. I know this wasn't your doing. He looked at Janet and Colleen. Thank you both as well for speaking up. That took courage. It took basic decency, Janet replied with a shrug. Nothing more. Denise was still standing at the desk, her arms crossed defensively across her chest. So this is how it's going to be? You're all just going to side with him? We're not siding with anyone, Ruth said tiredly. We're just acknowledging what happened. You attacked a guest unprovoked, and he responded by choosing to leave. It's as simple as that. Nothing about this is simple, Denise shot back. Actually, it is, Neil interjected. You were rude. I called you out on it. You continued to be rude. I decided to leave. That's the entire story. That's your version of the story, Denise said. It's the version that everyone here witnessed, Neil replied, gesturing to the audience and the cameras, including thousands of people watching at home. This seemed to give Denise pause. For the first time, she appeared to fully grasp the implications of what had just occurred. Her behavior hadn't just been witnessed by the people in the studio. It had been broadcast live to viewers across the country. She started, then stopped, seeming unsure how to continue. You what? Neil prompted gently. I didn't mean... Denise trailed off again. Didn't mean what? To be insulting? To be condescending? To call millions of people mediocre? Neil's voice wasn't angry anymore, just tired. The problem, Denise, is that you did mean it. Every word. You thought you could say whatever you wanted without consequence. That's not fair, Denise protested weakly. What's not fair is how you treated me today, Neil countered. What's not fair is that I came here expecting a professional interview and got ambushed instead. Colleen stood up now, joining Ruth and Janet. The three women formed a kind of barrier between Denise and Neil, though whether they were protecting one from the other or simply showing their support was unclear. Maybe we should all take a moment, Colleen suggested softly. Cool down a bit. There's nothing to cool down from on my end, Neil said. I'm perfectly calm. I'm just done. You're being stubborn, Denise accused, finding some of her earlier fire again. I'm being principled, Neil corrected. There's a difference, though I'm not sure you'd recognize it. That's another insult, Denise pointed out. No, it's an observation. Based on your behavior, Neil replied. You've spent this entire interview insulting me and everyone who watches my show. When I point out your failings, suddenly you're offended. That's called hypocrisy. Ruth sighed heavily. This isn't getting us anywhere. You're right, Neil agreed, which is why I'm leaving. He turned once more to go, and this time he actually started walking toward the exit. His steps were measured, unhurried. He wasn't fleeing or storming off. He was simply leaving, with his head held high. Wait, Denise called out, her voice different now, smaller. Just wait a second. Neil paused but didn't turn around. Why? Denise struggled with the words. Maybe I was a bit harsh. A bit? Janet interjected with a snort. Neil turned back slowly. A bit harsh, he repeated quietly. That's your assessment of what just happened? Denise's shoulders sagged slightly. What do you want me to say? I want you to take responsibility for your actions. Neil said simply, I want you to acknowledge that what you did was wrong. Not a bit harsh. Wrong. The two locked eyes across the studio. The moment stretched out, everyone waiting to see if Denise would actually admit fault. "I was trying to make good television," Denise said finally. "At my expense," Neil added. "Yes," Denise admitted quietly. "At your expense." "And was it worth it?" Neil asked. "Creating this scene? Humiliating a guest? Insulting your audience? Was it worth it for good television?" Denise didn't answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't know." "Well, I do," Neil said firmly. "It wasn't. Because good television doesn't come from cruelty. It doesn't come from tearing people down. It comes from genuine conversation, mutual respect, and authentic connection. All things that were completely absent from this interview." He looked around the studio one last time, taking in the panelists, the audience, the cameras that had captured every moment of this disaster. "I hope," he said, addressing everyone, "that something good comes from this. I hope people watching see what happened here and learn from it. Learn that it's okay to stand up for yourself. Learn that you don't have to accept mistreatment, no matter who it's coming from. Learn that respect is non-negotiable." With that, Neil Dudgeon walked off the Loose Women set, leaving behind a stunned silence and a host who had finally run out of things to say.